When your pelvis tilts forwards more than 7 to 10 degrees and your lower back, your lumbar spine hyperextends or has too much arching in it, you probably have anterior pelvic tilt, or at least an excessive anterior pelvic tilt. You might have really tight hip flexors, thighs, and low back muscles, and that's not surprising because those are associated with the muscle imbalances that cause anterior pelvic tilt, called lower crossed. I've literally taught thousands of people how to correct their anterior pelvic tilt over 16 years. This is a topic I've talked extensively on YouTube about over the years, and today I'm just gonna cut through all of the confusion here and just, like I said, show you the top 3 best exercises. Let's get into it. The first thing that we're gonna do is stretch the hip flexors using PAILs and rails. It's a fancy acronym for progressive angular isometric loading and regressive angular isometric loading. Big convoluted way of saying that it's an advanced stretch for the hip flexors. So it's gonna be a little bit different probably how you've stretched your hip flexors before, but you're gonna start off the stretch by getting into a similar position that you've probably seen on the internet and elsewhere, this half kneeling position, okay? But what you're gonna do here, and this part is essential, if you have anterior pelvic tilt, you're typically gonna be tilting forwards too much and arching the low back. We don't want to do that. We're trying to correct that. So what I want you to do the entire time throughout this drill is do a posterior pelvic tilt. Pretend like you're wearing a belt buckle and you're trying to angle that belt buckle up towards your face and maintain it kind of angled up towards the face throughout the entirety of the PAILs and rails here. Okay, so maintaining that posterior pelvic tilt, which means pelvis tucked underneath you, lower back is flattening out. What you're gonna do here is kind of lean forwards to extend that hip, maintaining that pelvis that's rotated backwards, okay? You don't wanna shift forwards and tilt forwards like this. So maintaining that posterior pelvic tilt, shift forwards, all right? Right now, you should feel a pretty deep stretch on the hip flexors here, all right? If you have the time, you can hold this stretch, squeezing this glute statically for 2 minutes, all right? The most ideal way to stretch them is to hold this for 2 minutes before you do the PAILs and rails. So if you can, with that posterior pelvic tilt, shift the hips forwards, extend that hip. You should feel a deep stretch right here in the hip flexors. But now I'm gonna show you how to do the PAILs and rails. All that you're gonna be doing here is contracting your muscles against the stretch and then contracting your muscles with the stretch. It's that simple, okay? So right now, my hip flexors are being stretched, this part of the hip. These muscles flex the hip, all right? They pull the leg up like this. So what we are doing in this position here, with them stretched with that posterior pelvic tilt, is you're gonna actually start to activate these muscles. Try to activate them like you're trying to pull this leg bone up, okay? Kind of pushing my knee into the ground this way, all right? Nothing's happening, all right? The leg is being blocked by the pad on the ground, and nothing's actually happening. I'm just simply turning my hip flexors on. The PAILs portion of this is you build up that muscle contraction to maximal intensity, where you're trying to pull up as hard as you can for about 30 seconds. And then we're immediately going to do the opposite. You're gonna squeeze the glutes and activate your glutes like you're trying to push your hip this way. All right, you might shift your hips forwards a little bit when you do this portion. Maintain that posterior pelvic tilt as you do it. Same thing here, we're building up that contraction in the glutes, harder, 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 over 30 seconds, squeezing the glute as hard as we can. And that's basically how you do PAILs and rails, okay? Most essential thing for anterior pelvic tilt here is the whole time you're doing this with a posterior pelvic tilt, all right? You can hold this stretch for 2 minutes. After that, 2 rounds of PAILs and rails, 30 seconds each. Activate this leg, try to pull it up this way. Nothing's moving because it's being blocked by the floor, but build up that contraction, 30 seconds of that. Squeeze the glute. Maybe shift forwards a little bit. Don't let the pelvis tilt forwards or lower back arch, but squeeze that glute as hard as you can and hold that contraction for 30 seconds as well. Exercise number 2 is what we call an RKC plank. It's basically doing like a traditional plank. However, it's doing it with a posterior pelvic tilt, okay? Similar to how we were doing the PAILs and rails, we're gonna be doing this with a tucked pelvis and a more flattened, neutralized lower back. That part is critical, and this is a kind of a simple modification to a traditional plank. So in a traditional plank, you would kind of just hold this, all right? A lot of people with anterior pelvic tilt, though, are gonna be extending from the spine, arching their back, feeling this in their back, feeling this in their legs. What we wanna do here, angle the belt buckle up towards the face, okay? Squeeze your glutes and your abs together and keep the pelvis in this tucked position, just like this, okay? This makes it so much more specific to fixing anterior pelvic tilt than just holding this with no awareness. Again, we're not doing this, all right? We're not even really in a neutral position. We're really emphasizing tucking that pelvis underneath, angling that belt buckle up towards the face by squeezing both your abs and your glutes pretty much as hard as you can during this exercise. The more intensity you give it, the harder the contractions are, the more benefits you're gonna get from it for this and for the pales and the rails. The final exercise is going to be barbell hip thrusters with, again, a posterior pelvic tilt. What do all these exercises I showed you have in common today? They're all done with a tucked pelvis, not one that's anteriorly or excessively forward, okay? So we're doing a lot of these with that posterior pelvic tilt, tucking that pelvis. The reason why this exercise is so important for fixing anterior pelvic tilt, first of all, doing it with a PPT will stretch the hip flexors, but more importantly, this strengthens the posterior chain, namely the gluteus maximus, which is antagonistic to these hip flexor muscles. Basically, when your hip flexors are tight, you're usually going to be weak in the opposite muscles, and strengthening the opposite muscles can help stop the hip flexors from tightening up over time on you again. So these three exercises kind of need to be done together because they all kind of synergize with each other. But to do a barbell hip thruster with the posterior pelvic tilt, pretty simple, right? You're kind of just doing a normal hip thruster. So using a barbell, you can use dumbbells for this. Doesn't really matter the type of equipment, but this is kind of the best setup for it. Drive basically through the heels and then push your hips up like this, okay? This is a barbell hip thrust. And again, we want to be doing this, emphasizing kind of angling that pelvis up towards the face the whole time. Definitely not arching the back up here, okay? So keep that pelvis tucked like that, especially at the top of this motion. For this, you want to do somewhere around 3 to 4 sets. You want to go pretty heavy with this. Again, as long as it's feeling good, you're able to feel it in your glutes. Doing this can really go a long ways in preventing those hip flexors from tightening up on you again after you've done those first 2 drills. There you have it. Throw these into your routine. The pales and the rails, the RKC planks, these can be done almost daily. The barbell hip thrusters, I probably would not do more than once or twice a week, depending on how well you recover from those training sessions. If you want more stuff from me on anterior pelvic tilt, check out my free full anterior pelvic tilt workout. There's a link for that in the comment section down below, alongside the description. If you want more stuff from me with regards to anterior pelvic tilt, download my free workout. It's a full workout designed specifically to target these same imbalances that we targeted today. Gives you a little bit more stuff to work on. And that's available in the comments down below. Just click the first link available there that I'll pin to the top. There's also a link to that free full anterior pelvic tilt workout in the description of this video. If you're looking for another spot to grab that free workout, click one of the links up here. I got other videos on the screen here that I've made when I'm talking about anterior pelvic tilt. So check those out. If you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, this is the kind of stuff that I talk about here. So give it a subscribe down below, and I'll see you next time.